In the heart of a small American town, one man watched his entire life crumble in a single morning. Betrayed by those he trusted most, he had every reason to give up. Instead, he chose to stand. This is the unforgettable story of a father's fight for justice and legacy. The morning air smelled of fresh-cut oak and linseed oil. Draven Quill stood in the old workshop, 48 years old, shoulders hunched slightly, as he ran his calloused fingers along the edge of the walnut table he'd been carving for weeks. Every smooth curve, every careful joint was meant for Aria. Her 16th birthday was only 9 days away. He could already picture her face when she saw it, that quiet, surprised smile she rarely showed anymore. He was just about to sand the final corner when the ground began to tremble. A low, guttural roar rolled across the yard. Not thunder. Something heavier. Mechanical. Hungry. Draven froze, sandpaper still in his hand. The sound grew louder, closer, until it drowned out the birds and the distant creek. He stepped to the wide doorway of the workshop and looked out. 4 massive bulldozers were crawling through the front gate like steel beasts, their yellow paint gleaming under the pale Midwest sun. Behind them, a sleek black Mercedes and a silver Range Rover rolled in slowly, tires crunching over the gravel he had laid with his own hands 20 years ago. His heart slammed against his ribs. The doors of the luxury cars opened. First came Lilith Ravencrest, the new mayor of Oak Ridge. Tall, elegant, dressed in a tailored navy coat that looked too expensive for a small-town morning. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, not a strand out of place. She carried herself like someone who had already won. Beside her stepped Orion Blackwood, the sharp-suited lawyer who represented the big development company. His polished shoes looked ridiculous on the dusty ground of the Quill family land. Draven's mouth went dry. Lilith walked straight toward him, heels clicking with purpose. Orion followed 2 steps behind, holding a thick manila folder like it was a weapon. "Mr. Quill," Lilith said, her voice smooth and professional, almost kind. "I'm afraid we have some difficult news this morning." She extended the folder. Draven didn't take it at first. His fingers were still gripping the sandpaper so tightly the grit bit into his palm. He stared at the official seal on the document. Eminent domain. Public benefit. Oak Ridge Lakeside Resort Project. The words blurred. "This land," Lilith continued, "has been designated for redevelopment. The town council voted last week. It's for the greater good of Oak Ridge. New jobs, tourism, a future for all of us." Draven finally looked up at her face. He searched for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of humanity. There was none. His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. "This workshop, this house, has been in my family for 4 generations. My grandfather built it with his bare hands after the war. My father taught me to work wood right here. My daughter was born in that house." Lilith's expression didn't change. "Compensation will be offered at fair market value," Orion Blackwood cut in, his tone clinical. "You have 30 days to vacate. We're prepared to be reasonable." Reasonable. The word landed like a slap. Draven felt something crack open inside his chest. Not loud, not violent, but deep and painful. This wasn't just wood and nails. This was every Sunday dinner his late wife had cooked in that kitchen. Every scar on his hands from years of honest work. Every quiet evening he had spent teaching Aria how to sand a board without rushing. This was home. He finally took the folder. His hands were shaking. Behind him, inside the workshop, the half-finished walnut table stood silent. A promise he suddenly wasn't sure he could keep. Lilith gave a small, polite nod. "We're sorry it had to be this way, Mr. Quill. Progress sometimes asks for sacrifices." As the 2 of them turned and walked back toward their expensive cars, Draven remained rooted in place, the folder heavy in his grip. The bulldozers idled loudly, their engines growling like impatient dogs waiting for the command to tear everything apart. He looked down at the official papers again. Then he looked at the old oak tree his grandfather had planted the year his father was born, the tree that shaded the workshop every summer. Something cold and heavy settled in his stomach. This wasn't just about losing land. This was about losing the last piece of who he was and who he still needed to be for his daughter. In the distance, the first bulldozer lowered its blade with a metallic groan. Draven Quill stood motionless in the morning light, heart pounding, mind racing with a single, terrifying question he didn't yet dare speak aloud. What kind of man was he willing to become, to protect what was left of his family? 3 weeks had passed since the bulldozers first rolled onto the property. Draven Quill sat at the old oak dinner table that had belonged to his grandparents. The chair across from him, his wife's chair, remained empty. The silence in the house felt heavier than any machine noise he had heard that terrible morning. He stared at the untouched plate of food in front of the empty seat. Steam had long stopped rising. The meatloaf was cold now, just like everything else. It had started with the constant phone calls from the town office, then the endless paperwork, the late-night meetings with lawyers who spoke in circles. His wife had tried to stay strong for him and Aria. She had smiled through the fear, held his hand tighter every night, whispered that they would fight this together. But the stress had eaten away at her day after day, until one quiet Tuesday afternoon, her body simply gave out. Draven still remembered the moment the hospital called. The way his hands had trembled so badly he dropped the phone twice before he could answer. By the time he reached the small county hospital, she was already slipping away. He held her hand in those final minutes, feeling the warmth slowly leave her fingers while the monitors flatlined around them. She never got to see Aria blow out the candles on her 16th birthday cake. Now, the house felt like a tomb. Upstairs, Aria's bedroom door stayed closed for days at a time. Draven would stand outside in the hallway at night, ear pressed gently against the wood, listening for any sound that his daughter was still breathing. Some nights he heard soft crying, other nights, nothing, and that silence terrified him more than anything. One evening, he found her in the bathroom. The razor blade lay on the sink, a thin line of red already forming on her wrist. Aria looked up at him with empty eyes, whispering, "I just wanted it to stop hurting, Dad." Draven had pulled her into his arms, both of them shaking. He bandaged her wrist with trembling fingers and stayed beside her bed until dawn, afraid to close his eyes even for a moment. Every night after that, he slept in the old armchair in the corner of her room, waking at the slightest movement. He was losing her too. During the day, the weight of it all pressed down on his chest until breathing became difficult. The workshop stood half empty now, some tools already boxed up by court order. The walnut table for Aria's birthday still sat unfinished, covered by a dusty sheet. He couldn't bring himself to touch it. One afternoon, while flipping through channels on the old television, Draven stopped on the local news. There was Lilith Ravencrest standing confidently at a podium outside the new town hall, smiling brightly for the cameras. "Oak Ridge is moving forward," she announced with polished warmth. "This resort project will bring hundreds of jobs and a brighter future for every family here. Progress isn't always easy, but it's necessary." Draven's jaw tightened until it ached. He watched her speak about sacrifice for the greater good, while his wife's funeral flowers were still wilting on the mantelpiece. The rage that rose in him was quiet, deep and dangerous, not the kind that screamed, but the kind that burned slowly and never went out. He turned the television off. Later that evening, a soft knock came at the back door. It was Saren Vale, Aria's English teacher from the high school. She stood on the porch holding a small stack of school assignments and a gentle, worried smile. "I didn't want to bother you," she said quietly. but Aria hasn't turned in anything for weeks. I thought, maybe these could help. And if there's anything I can do—" Her voice trailed off. She didn't push. She simply handed him the papers and a small note with her phone number. Draven nodded, unable to find the right words. Something in her eyes told him she understood more than she was saying. The next morning, another visitor arrived. Bastian Crow, his old friend from high school, the former firefighter who had carried more people out of burning buildings than anyone in the county, stood awkwardly on the front steps, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I heard about your wife," Bastian said, voice rough with discomfort. "I'm sorry, Draven. I should have come sooner." They sat on the porch in silence for a long time. Bastian kept glancing at him as if there was something heavy he wanted to say, but couldn't quite bring himself to release. In the end, he only clapped Draven on the shoulder and muttered, "You're not alone in this, brother. Not completely." Draven watched his friend walk away, wondering what Bastian knew that he wasn't ready to share yet. That night, as Draven sat once again in the armchair beside Aria's bed, listening to her uneven breathing, a new feeling began to grow beneath the grief and fear. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a cold, quiet fury. He was losing everything that mattered: his wife, his home, and now possibly his daughter. And while he sat here broken, Lilith Ravencrest continued smiling on television, talking about progress as if no one had paid the price with their life. Draven looked at Aria's pale face on the pillow and made a silent promise in the darkness. He would not let them take her too. The rain fell softly on the tin roof of the workshop the day they buried his wife. Draven Quill sat alone on an old wooden stool, the space around him already half sealed with bright yellow tape that read, "Official notice, do not enter." One corner of the workshop had been boarded up by court order. Only a small section remained his for now. In his rough hands, he held an old photograph. 4 faces smiled back at him: himself, his wife, a much younger Aria, and the family dog that had passed years ago. The edges of the photo were worn from years of being carried in his wallet. He ran his thumb slowly across his wife's face. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the quiet workshop. "I should have protected you better." The grief sat heavy in his chest, mixed with a guilt that refused to leave him alone. Every creak of the old building reminded him of her laughter, echoing through these walls on lazy Sunday afternoons. A soft knock sounded at the side door. Draven looked up slowly. Bastian Crow stepped inside, shaking rain from his jacket. His old friend's face was lined with concern as he pulled up another stool and sat down heavily. "You look like hell, Draven." Draven gave a weak, bitter smile, but said nothing. Bastian stared at the yellow tape for a long moment before speaking again, his voice low and careful. "You can't just sit here and let them take everything, brother. Not after what they've already cost you. This isn't right. A lot of folks in town are whispering the same thing, but nobody wants to be the first one to speak up." Draven's fingers tightened around the photograph. Later that same afternoon, another quiet visitor arrived. Saren Vale appeared at the workshop door carrying a thin folder under her arm. She glanced around nervously before stepping inside, as if she was afraid someone might be watching. "I brought Aria's school records," she said softly, placing the folder on the workbench. "Her attendance, her grades, the notes from the counselor. It's all here. She's falling apart, Draven. The stress from all this is destroying her. If the court sees these documents, they'll understand she needs her father more than ever." Draven opened the folder with trembling hands. Page after page showed his daughter's slow unraveling, missed classes, failing marks, teacher comments about withdrawal and emotional distress. Each line felt like another small knife in his heart. He closed the folder gently. For the first time since the bulldozers had come, something shifted inside him. A clear, cold realization settled deep in his bones. If he stayed silent, it wouldn't stop with his family. Dozens of other homes in Oak Ridge, families who had lived here for generations, would be next. Good people who worked hard, raised children, and believed the town would protect them. They would all lose everything they had built, just like he was losing now. Draven looked up at Seren, then at Bastion, who had stayed quietly in the corner. "I'm not going to fight them with anger," he said, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. "And I'm sure as hell not going to fight with violence. That's what they expect." He paused, staring at the old family photo once more. "I'm going to fight them with the truth." That night, after Aria had finally fallen into a restless sleep, Draven sat alone at the kitchen table with a notebook and a single lamp burning. He began writing down every detail he could remember: dates, conversations, the way Lilith and Orion had spoken that morning. Small things, quiet things, the kind of details most people would overlook. His phone suddenly vibrated on the table. An unknown number. Draven hesitated, then answered. A calm, professional woman's voice came through the line. "Draven Quill, this is Nix Harlan. We worked together years ago on that land dispute case up north. I heard what's happening in Oak Ridge." Draven's breath caught slightly. He remembered Nix, sharp, fearless, and one of the few lawyers he had ever truly trusted. "I can't come there right now," she continued quietly, "but I can help from a distance. Send me whatever you find. Documents, names, patterns. I'll guide you on what to look for and how to protect it. You're not alone in this." Draven closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight on his shoulders shift just a little. "Thank you," he whispered. After the call ended, he sat in silence for a long time. The pain was still there, raw and deep. The fear for Aria still gripped his heart like a vice, but beneath all of it, something new had taken root. A quiet, cold, determined oath. He would not let rage blind him. He would not let grief destroy him. He would gather the truth, piece by careful piece, until it was strong enough to stand on its own. Draven looked toward the stairs where his daughter slept, then down at the notebook in front of him. This was no longer just about saving his home. It was about saving what was left of his family, and protecting every other family in Oak Ridge who couldn't fight for themselves. Outside, the rain continued to fall softly on the old workshop roof. Inside, for the first time since his wife's death, Draven Quill felt the faintest spark of purpose return to his broken heart. The nights grew longer and quieter as autumn settled over Oak Ridge. Draven Quill began slipping out of the house after Aria finally fell asleep. He drove the old pickup truck with its headlights off for the last mile, parking behind the county records building under the cover of overgrown maple trees. The air smelled of damp paper and old ink as he let himself in through the side door using the spare key the night janitor had quietly pressed into his hand weeks earlier. He worked by the faint glow of a small flashlight, turning pages slowly, carefully, so no one would hear the rustle of paper in the empty halls. Nix Harlan's voice came through his phone on speaker, low and steady, guiding him from hundreds of miles away. "Look for anything dated 2 weeks before the vote," she instructed calmly. "Cross-reference the payment ledgers with the development company's filings. Follow the money, Draven. It always leaves footprints." Night after night he searched, then one cold October evening he found it. Tucked between dusty folders in the back room of the county clerk's office was a chain of emails printed and filed as public correspondence. In them, Lilith Ravencrest had accepted a substantial consulting fee from the Development Corporation, wired just days before she signed the eminent domain order. Further down, he uncovered Orion Blackwood's handwritten notes on property appraisals, deliberately lowered to make the compensation offers look fair while stripping families of their true worth. Draven's hands trembled as he photographed each page with his phone. He sat back against the cold metal filing cabinet, breathing slowly, fighting the wave of anger that threatened to overwhelm him. These weren't just numbers on paper. They were lives, homes where children had grown up, porches where old neighbors had shared coffee for decades. He kept going. The deeper he dug, the clearer the pattern became. More than 24 families in Oak Ridge were facing the same quiet destruction, some already packing boxes in secret, others too afraid to speak. Draven saw their names listed in the files, and something inside him shifted. The broken father who had once sat crying over an old photograph was slowly becoming something else. A man who refused to look away. One gray afternoon, Saren Vale sent him a short text. "Coffee shop by the lake, 3 p.m. Please come." Draven arrived early and chose a corner table near the window. The small cafe overlooked the quiet water, leaves drifting across the surface like forgotten memories. Saren walked in holding Aria's hand gently. His daughter looked thinner, her eyes shadowed, but she didn't pull away when Draven stood up. They sat together in silence for a while, 3 cups of coffee growing cold between them. Then Aria spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared, Dad." She looked down at her hands. "I keep thinking, if they take the house, I'll lose you too. Just like Mom. Everyone keeps saying things will get better, but I don't believe them anymore." Draven reached across the table and took her hand. His throat tightened so much he could hardly speak. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart," he said softly. "Not without a fight. But this fight, it has to be the right kind, one that doesn't break us more than we already are." For the first time in months, Aria let tears fall freely. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and Draven held her there, feeling the fragile weight of his daughter's trust returning in small, precious pieces. That same week, Bastion Crow finally broke his silence. They met at the old fire station after dark, sitting on the back bumper of Bastion's truck. "I saw something I shouldn't have," Bastion admitted, his voice rough with guilt. "Last spring, Orion Blackwood meeting with one of the county supervisors in the back room of the country club. Money changed hands. I was there dropping off equipment. They didn't know I saw it. They made it very clear what would happen if I talked." Bastion looked at Draven with tired eyes. "I've been carrying that around for months, scared for my own family. But seeing what it's doing to you and Aria, I can't stay quiet anymore." Draven nodded slowly, the weight of new evidence settling on his shoulders. Every new piece of information brought both fear and strange hope. Fear that they might be watching him. Hope that the truth was finally becoming heavy enough to matter. He no longer lay awake only grieving. Now he lay awake planning, methodically, patiently, turning pain into purpose. As he drove home through the empty streets of Oak Ridge that night, the folder of copied documents resting on the passenger seat, Draven felt the quiet oath he had made in the workshop growing stronger. He was no longer just trying to survive. He was preparing to stand. And somewhere in the distance, the town hall lights still burned late, as if waiting for the moment when all these shadows would finally step into the light. The town hall was packed on the coldest night of December. Rows of wooden chairs filled with familiar faces, neighbors Draven had known for decades, families who had quietly lost sleep over the same fears he carried. The air felt thick with anticipation and unspoken tension as people whispered among themselves. Draven Quill sat near the front, hands resting calmly on his lap, though his heart hammered steadily against his ribs. Beside him, Aria sat straight and pale, clutching a folded piece of paper in her small hands. At the front of the room, Lilith Ravencrest stood at the podium in a crisp burgundy suit, smiling with practiced confidence. Orion Blackwood sat to her right, adjusting his tie repeatedly as if it had suddenly grown too tight. The meeting began exactly as everyone expected. Lilith leaned into the microphone, her voice ringing with triumph. "Tonight, I am proud to announce that the Oak Ridge Lakeside Resort project is moving forward. This is a new chapter for our town, one of growth, opportunity, and shared prosperity. A few polite claps scattered through the crowd. Draven waited. Then he rose slowly to his feet. The room grew strangely quiet as all eyes turned toward him. "Before you celebrate," Draven said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of months of pain, "there are some things this town deserves to know." He stepped into the aisle, holding a thick binder. Nyx Harlan appeared quietly from the side entrance and stood beside him, her presence strong and composed, the first time she had shown her face in Oak Ridge. "I have spent the last several months looking through public records," Draven continued, speaking clearly so every person could hear. "What I found wasn't progress. It was betrayal." One by one, he laid out the evidence, calmly, methodically. The consulting fees paid to Lilith Ravencrest, the manipulated appraisals signed by Orion Blackwood, the pattern of lowered offers that had quietly devastated dozens of families. With each page he presented, the atmosphere in the hall shifted. Whispers turned into gasps. Heads turned toward the podium where Lilith's smile had begun to crack. Lilith's voice rose sharply. "This is ridiculous. These are baseless accusations from a grieving man who—" She stopped when Nyx Harlan stepped forward and spoke with quiet authority. "These documents have already been reviewed by federal authorities." At that moment, Seraphine Locke, the assistant U.S. attorney, walked through the side door with 2 federal agents. Her expression was calm but unmistakably serious. Lilith's face drained of color. Orion Blackwood rose halfway from his chair, then sat back down heavily, his usual smoothness gone. Before Lilith could speak again, Aria stood up beside her father. Her hands shook as she unfolded the letter, but her voice, though soft, carried through the silent hall. "This is from my mother," she said, reading slowly. "She wrote it 2 weeks before she passed. She said, 'A home isn't just walls and land. It's where we teach our children that standing up for what's right matters more than being comfortable. If we lose that, we lose everything.'" Aria's voice broke on the last words, but she kept going. "I don't want to lose my father the same way I lost her, and I don't want any other family in this town to lose what we almost lost." The room was completely still. Then Bastion Crow stood up from the back row. "I saw money change hands," he said, his deep voice steady. "I was scared to speak before, but I'm not scared anymore." Seren Vale rose next, her gentle presence somehow making the moment even more powerful. "Aria is not the only child suffering," she said quietly. "Many families have been torn apart by fear and uncertainty. This wasn't progress. This was greed dressed up as progress." The air in the town hall had changed completely. Lilith Ravencrest tried one final time, her voice rising in panic. "You have no right." Seraphine Locke cut her off with calm finality. "Actually, we do. Lilith Ravencrest and Orion Blackwood, you are both under arrest for public corruption, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation." The 2 federal agents moved forward. Lilith's carefully constructed composure shattered as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. Orion Blackwood looked stunned, his face pale and sweating under the bright lights. As they were led out through the side door, the entire town watched in heavy silence. Weeks later, on a quiet spring morning, the land was officially returned. Draven Quill stood in the soft sunlight with Aria beside him, a young woman named Elowyn Shade, someone he had met during the long months of preparation, whose quiet strength had slowly become a source of comfort, stood with them, holding a small sapling. Together, the 3 of them knelt in the earth where the old oak tree had once stood. Draven pressed the roots into the soil with careful hands, the same hands that had once carved furniture with love and later gathered evidence in the dark. Aria covered the roots with dirt, her eyes bright with something that looked like hope for the first time in many months. Elowyn placed her hand gently over Draven's as they patted the soil firm. No one spoke for a long while. They didn't need to. This tree would grow slowly, just as their healing had come, not in loud victory, but in quiet, determined persistence. Draven looked at his daughter, then at Elowyn, feeling the warmth of new beginnings after so much loss. He finally understood. When systems fail and power betrays the people it should protect, justice can still rise, not through rage, but through unwavering truth and the courage to stand together. And real legacy wasn't measured in land or buildings. It was measured in the way we choose to protect the ones we love. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you, truly. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.